Well, welcome everyone to this presentation. We have Abba Shapiro, who is our senior trainer here at Skylum Software. Abba's going to be showing you everything you want to know about Luminar 3 with libraries. So this will be a very exciting event. We're glad that you can join us. And thank you, Abba.
Thank you very much, Laurie, and thank you everybody for joining us. I'm very excited today to show off Luminar 3, which is Luminar with libraries. It adds a whole new dimension to working with Luminar. For those of you who have worked with it, there is still a very familiar program. The way you edit a photo is exactly the same, but it does bring a lot more power into the equation. But what's really nice is I can bring in folders. I can add folders of photos, organize them very quickly, and edit the ones I want and easily export them either one at a time or in a group. So it really takes this to the next level. So for those of you who are familiar with Luminar already, you'll learn a little bit about libraries. For those of you who are completely new to the application, we'll cover both the libraries part of Luminar and we'll cover a little bit of editing within the framework of Luminar with libraries. So here we are. This is one of the interfaces. I've opened up a bunch of images to start with, just to give you a feel for what the interface looks like and how it might differ from what you've already used. And I've added a couple of folders of images already for us to look at, and we'll continue to add some more images and talk a little bit about the differences between folders, between albums, and a feature we have called QuickEdit. So the first thing I want to just show you is how beautiful the interface is when you review your photos. If you notice, and I'm going to scroll slowly because I know the internet, of course, sometimes lags a little bit. We don't waste any space. I can look at my images, they're organized nicely, and I can actually see what my images are. Now, we're going to go across the interface, and at the very top of the interface is the toolbar. And for those who have worked in Luminar, you're probably familiar with the toolbar. But it does change a little bit because we have a couple of different views. Right now, we are in the library view, which is where you can look at your images, you can organize your images, you can also rate and flag and favorite images, and we'll be doing that shortly. Now, if you look in the upper right part of the interface, there's 4 buttons, and we're going to focus mainly on 2. One says Library, and that you can see is highlighted in orange, and that means that's the active window or the active view. If I click on the button next to it, the Edit button, I actually switch to my Edit view, and this may look very familiar to those of you who have been using Luminar. And here I can apply my Luminar looks, which you can see across the bottom. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about those when we get to the second half of the webinar. And on the right side, we have all of the filters that have been applied to this image, and I can add additional filters and process my image. So those are the 2 areas, but I want you to notice that when I switch over to the edit area, some buttons on the toolbar change because it's more appropriate for those buttons in the edit part and for different ones in the library. Just to the right, so there's no suspense or mystery, we have an info button, and that just lets me look at some of the metadata of the photograph that I'm working with, the camera that I may have used, and then the lens, as well as things such as ISO and shutter speed and whatnot, some of the information. And then on the far right is my share button, and I'd use that when I want to export my images. And that's how we'll be wrapping up the instructional part of the webinar. So let's jump back into libraries and talk a little bit how libraries work. Now, you've noticed when I've jumped back to libraries, I've clicked the library button, my interface didn't change that much. The toolbar did a little bit because I'm still looking at this one image. But if I want to look at other images in my library, it's very easy for me to look at all of the photos if I want. Photos I've recently added, so if I clicked on that, I have the recently added folders. And what I need to do is I need to go up a level. from looking at this image. And so we're going to look at the toolbar at this point and look at some of the functionality of these buttons as we step across. Now, my mouse is directly below an up arrow. It's directly below the word image on the menu, on the main menu. And if I click that, that'll bring me up back into that area that I was before, where I could look at all of my images. Now, at this point, I want to talk to you a little bit about the interface and the way it works. So I was talking about the fact that it's really nicely organized to see my images. But the folks, the engineers, I should say, who have done an amazing job here, realize that we all have different size screens, and at different points in time, we may want to see more or fewer images on our interface. So one of the things that you can do is you can change the size of the thumbnails that you're looking at. So if you want to see more images, you can simply click on small, and it immediately resizes, and now I have smaller thumbnails so I can see more of my images. Very easy for me to view them. But if I'm working on, say, a smaller screen, say a 13-inch laptop, or I just want to be able to see more detail in my image, it's very easy for me to switch between small, medium, large, and I can even go with the plus and minus buttons to do the same thing to even larger. And this is great because it allows me to see some of the true detail. I can see if the picture was actually in focus and determine if the image actually has potential for me to edit. So I really do love this feature. And you'll notice even as I jump through this, all the different sizes, it's very, very responsive. Let's go back to the medium. I think that's a good size to work with. And let's talk a little bit about adding images to your library. Now, the way Luminar works is it actually takes advantage of the folder structure in the operating system. Now, Luminar 3 works the same way on both Windows and Mac. So depending on what machine you have, it really doesn't matter because it works exactly the same way. And ultimately, there will be total parity. There may be a little bit of difference when we first release it on the 18th of this month. The engineers are just making sure everything is tweaked really well and stable. And I do want to point out that we've incorporated a lot of features already into Luminar 3, but we have a very strong roadmap, and we're going to be adding features on a regular basis, and by regular, practically monthly. At the end of the webinar, Laurie will show you a link to where you can see our roadmap of what we plan to release at the 18th of this month, as well as what we're looking to add to the software over the next quarter and beyond. So it's important to note that this is just a starting point. We wanted to get the software into the hands of everybody and start listening to the feedback of what you want in this type of application. So there will be probably some features that you might be familiar with from other programs that haven't been implemented yet, but I do want to point out that the engineers and the folks at Skylum are listening, and we want to create this photographer's tool for photographers. We're a bunch of photographers behind the design, and I think that's important. We want it to be easy to use, elegant, enjoyable, but yet quick and powerful. So let's take a look at some of the things you can do with Luminar. As I indicated a little bit earlier, it's very easy to add images to my library. Now, when I add a folder of images to my library, I am physically not moving anything. I'm just reading what's on the operating system or what's in the Finder or an Explorer, and that makes it very quick. It doesn't have to make copies or anything. And because it's a direct relationship, I can use Luminar to help organize those folders. So if I wanted to add more folders of photographs, whether it's a vacation or a camera roll, it's very easy to do. And I can do that in a few locations. I'm going to point out the two most convenient ones that I use. On the far right side of the interface, on the right panel, there's a little plus button next to the word folders. So I'm going to add a folder to Luminar. And when I click on this, I can search anywhere in my operating system. And as you see on my desktop, I have a variety of folders. So if I wanted to add, say, my vacation from Shanghai and the trip from Alaska, as well as some beach portraits, I can go ahead and simply hold down the Command key, or on a Windows machine, the Alt key, and select multiple folders. And then I simply click Add Folders. And what Luminar is going to do, it's going to actually just pull these. And you saw how quickly it brought in a lot of these images. Now I'm looking at the Shanghai folder, and I know that, one, because of the images, but if I look at the right side, there I can see that under folders, it has kept the folder structure of all of the images that I brought in. And as a matter of fact, if there were folders within folders, I would see subfolders here. But we'll get to that probably in another webinar. But just so you know that if you've pre-organized your photos into a giant photography folder, and inside there were subfolders and even subfolders below that, that folder structure is maintained and respected when you add these folders to the interface. I can look at my Paris folders right there. That's what we were looking at earlier. We had some miscellaneous folders. Then we have the beach folders. This is some model shots that I was working on, as well as the trip to Alaska. So this keeps the structure there, so I could look at these individual groups, but I could also focus on everything if I want. So if I click on all photos at the top, I'm seeing every photo that's in my Luminar library or my Luminar catalog. And I do want to point out that you do have the option of creating multiple catalogs. So if I went up under File and Catalog, I could go ahead and say, you know what? I want to open an existing one, or I want to create a new one. And this is great because there are times that maybe you want to keep all of your travel photos together, and that can be one catalog, but still keep them organized by the location of the trips. But then you might have a separate catalog for clients. And that catalog, if you're a wedding photographer, could be the individual weddings. Or you could have a catalog for each wedding, and then you might have that broken down into posed shots and the random shots you might have taken, or maybe even shots that were given to you. So this organization is really very powerful. And I want to point out that when I'm adding anything using this folder structure, I'm not moving anything on my hard drive. I'm just reading where it is. And this is great because I don't have to worry that things will go offline, because as soon as I open up the application, it just looks in that location and finds the images. Now, what's really cool, and I'm not going to do this during the webinar, I'm just going to explain it. I did want to point out that if I had an external drive and I added these folders, if I unplug that drive, those images would still exist in my library because Luminar has grabbed thumbnails of them. I can't edit them, but I can organize and rate and flag them. And we'll look at rating and flagging and organizing in just a moment. But what's really cool is it'll be grayed out. There'll be a little warning icon that says the media is offline. But as soon as I plug that drive in, everything is live again, and I don't have to reattach it. And that's one of the beauties of the way libraries work. So that's one way to bring things in. I mentioned that there's another way to add folders. In the upper left corner of the interface, there's a little drop-down menu. And as you can see, there is the option to add a folder. Now, there's a couple of other options here that I want to talk about. And when you choose them, it does something different under the hood. If you choose to import images, what Luminar will do is it will physically copy or move images from one location to another. So if I say import images, and I can import them into an existing folder, because that's what I have here in my folder structure, or if I wanted to, I could go ahead and I could create a new folder. So if I hit, hit the plus button, if you see on the bottom left corner, it says new folder. I'm going to actually put this inside of my photos folder. I'm going to say new, and I'm going to say webinar. So what's going to happen here is something different. I'm actually creating a folder at the Explorer level or at the Finder level inside of there, and I'm going to simply use this as my new location to move images, say off a camera card, or maybe from an external hard drive into an internal hard drive. You'll notice it is grayed out. And that just indicates there's nothing inside that folder. As a matter of fact, if you look closely, you can see how many images are in each of these folders and the total images that I have brought in, 253. Now, while we're talking about images, I do want to point out that Luminar works with all flavors of images. It will work with JPEG files, PICT files, TIFF files, all of the raw files from the most popular camera manufacturers, and we'll even bring in a .psd file, a flattened one, so it can read almost any type of image file that you have, and that's really nice. So if I have a folder of raw images, I can bring them in. If I have a folder of JPEGs, I can bring them in, and I can keep them organized. But what I just did is I created a new folder, and I want to import something into that folder. So I can either right click now that I've created it, and I can say import images into this folder. I do want to point out that I can create new subfolders in here for my organizational structure, and that's going to create a new folder on my hard drive. So my images will not only be organized in Luminar, but they'll also be organized on my hard drive, and that is great. And if I need to, I can do things such as rename a folder. If I have a folder that I'm no longer using or want access to, I can remove it from the catalog safely and it will still be okay on my hard drive. And if I'm just wondering what I'm looking at or where it is, I can easily locate all this. So if I click on Show in Finder, it will actually open up that folder, and you can see I've created one called Webinar. So I'm going to go ahead, close this out, and I'm going to import a file just to show you how it's different than adding one. I will physically be creating or moving images into this folder. And this is great if I have an external hard drive that I want to move the images to my internal, or perhaps I've created a folder on an external media drive and I want to move everything off my camera card onto that folder. So if I go ahead and I click on import images, you'll notice now, since I've created that folder, I can import them into my webinar folder, and it will go ahead and ask me where I want to look. Now I'm going to go back to the photos on my desktop. I'll look at, I think I've already brought in miscellaneous, but I'm going to bring in maybe an image from my QuickEdit. And as you can see, I can step inside, view this as a list. I can also view this as icons. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring in a couple of images, and this will give me some options. So I'll click on Lighthouse, Olivia PR for Puerto Rico, and I also have one of the same person in looking at some sunflowers, and then I also have a savanna shot. But what's important is the bottom part. So you'll notice that there's an action option. And if I click on that, I have two choices. Do I want to copy the images from their current location, in which case they'll maintain where they are, whether it's on the camera card or the external drive, and it's just going to make an exact copy in this new folder in my operating system? Or do I want to physically move them, and that means that they will no longer be in the original location? So we're actually moving and organizing our images from within inside of Luminar. For the time being, actually, I'm going to move these images. So you'll see what happens. So I'm going to click on Move Images. And then, of course, I can move them into that single folder. But I can also choose when I'm importing images if I want to reorganize them into a slightly different folder structure. If there were multiple layers, if I clicked on a folder that had 5 or 6 folders inside of it that were organized, I could keep them in that original folder structure. Or maybe I want to break them up into year, month, and day, or year and month, so that when I open that folder, my images are defined by that. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and do year and month and day, just so you can see what it looks like. Okay, And let's go ahead and click Import Folder. So what you'll notice is these images, these 4 images I've selected, have been now brought into my library. And if I look over here on the right where it says Webinar, there's a little disclosure triangle. And if I click on that, look at that. It actually has broken these down into the dates. So one of these was taken on the 1st of August, 2013. And if I click on that, you can see it's this lighthouse. And if I click on what was shot in 2018, I have one image that was shot on August 22nd and a couple that were shot in October. So as you can see, it's very easy for me to keep things organized. Now, this has physically moved these images. If I click on Webinar and I say Show in Finder, it's going to take me to my operating system. If you're on Windows, it would be the same thing as in Explorer. And you'll notice there's the webinar, and I'll double click on the webinar folder. And as you can see, we've actually created 2 folders in here, and it has organized them by dates. So that's an important thing to note, is that when I'm working with folders, I am physically looking at what's on my internal, external hard drives, as well as camera cards, and even cloud storage. So if you are working with, say, Dropbox, and you have files that are synced locally, you can point to that folder and use and edit those images. Now, it does have to be synced locally. But where this comes really nicely into play is that if I have a Dropbox that I'm sharing with somebody and they add images to it, when I launch Luminar, Luminar will update its library with those images. I don't have to import those. It automatically pulls those locations and lets me start working with those images. As a matter of fact, if I shrink this down, I just want to move it out of the way. I want to point out that folder that I created. Okay, and so there it is, webinar, and those are the dates. But if I went ahead and I grabbed another image, and I'm going to grab something from miscellaneous, and I'll drop it into that folder, and we could pretend that that's an image that, uh, actually I want to grab something from QuickEdit. I've already imported miscellaneous. So there we go, QuickEdit. And I'm going to go ahead and just grab one of these images, this uh, Cabo sunrise before, and I drop that into just the top level of webinar. There it is. When I go back into Luminar, and I'll bring this full screen again, and we look inside that folder, it might take a second to refresh. No, actually, the image is there. There is that image. I did not have to import that, or actually, I did not have to add that, because it's automatically pulling those folders that I'm working with. So it's really, really flexible. So that's one of the other things. There's a third way to bring things in. And, a 1 hour webinar doesn't truly justify how robust this program is. But the nice thing is even if you don't know all the details and nuances, it's very intuitive and very easy to use. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start rating and flagging some of my images. And I can do this either at a single folder level. So if I wanted to, I could just go in and rate all the ones from Shanghai, or I could look at all of my photos all at once and start rating. Okay, so there we go. I've been bringing things in today, my 256 folders. So I can go through and I can start rating images, and I'm going to actually make this a little bit smaller. I'll take a look at just the Shanghai images, so we have fewer to work with. And so I can go through and very quickly give my images a star rating of 1 to 5 stars. Now I could click on the little stars here and say, oh, that's a 4-star image, or in this case, maybe it's a 2-star image, but I know I can save it in Luminar. I like this one a little better, it's 3. But there are keyboard shortcuts, and that's a lot faster. So I could go through and very quickly rate an image. I want this to be 3 stars, so I'm hitting the 3 on the keyboard. I select this one. This is 4. And I can even use my left and right arrow keys to quickly move through my images. So this is a 5. This is a 5. That's a little dark. It's a 4. And I can continue to go through 3, 3. I'm going to skip this one and go through. This is a 2. And these were all bracketed images, so I can bring them together. So I can very quickly rate things with stars. And if I've hit the wrong number, if I look at this one and say, oh, that really is not a 3, that's a 4, I can just hit 4 and it will bring it up to the next rating. So I can rate things very easily, but I can do other things with my image. I can also go through and I can choose our flag if I want them to be maybe a favorite, or I can reject them. So if I don't like an image, I want to reject it, I can right click on any of my images and set the rating, as you can see. We saw I did that with the keyboard shortcut. I do the same thing with my flags. So right now it's unrated, but I can choose P or X. And I remember this. P is a pick. P is something that I want to work with, and X means I'm crossing it off the list. I don't want to use it. So I can go through to an image and say, you know what? That's a reject. That's an X. The next one has potential. That's a pick. The next one's a pick. And I want you to notice that when I hit P or X, that there's a little icon in the bottom right-hand corner of each of the images, and there's a heart if it's a pick, and there's the universal sign of no if I have rejected it. If I want, and I can say, let me think about this one, I can hit the U key. You can define that as either undecided, or you can also see it is just unmarked. So I can go through and I can say, yeah, I want to think about that one. So this is another way to flag or to rate your photos. So it's very easily to say the ones you love and the ones you don't love. And everybody has their own style. And that's what we want to give you, is just the option of doing however you like. Sometimes I'll go through very quickly and reject and pick. And from those, I will then start rating. For those of you who have come from other software where you can also color label your images, you can do that here too. So I can set a color label on an image. And again, there's keyboard shortcuts. Not as easy to remember as 1 through 5, or P for a pick, or X for a reject, but I can give things a color, and this is great. And you can organize your photos any way you want using colors. So for instance, I could say any night shot's going to be red. So I can go through and either right click and set my color label to red, or I know that it is the number 6, night shot, night shot, night shot, and then maybe a shot with, I don't have any shots with people here. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe have my sunset ones, and I'll give that a 7, and that's going to be yellow. And you can see there's a little dot here. Now I went into this detail because I want to show you, now that I've rated some of my images, how easy it is to view just the images I want. So if you look over in the upper right part of the interface, there are 2 drop downs. One is showing, and the other is also your sorting option. And I have it sorted by capture time, but I want to go ahead and look at the drop down for showing. And we're showing all of my photos. But if I wanted to, I can say, you know what? Just show me the ones that are my favorites. And when I do that, I will only see the ones that have the little hearts on it. So sometimes what I might do is go through and just do picks and rejects. And then once I have all my picks, I can say show by favorites. And now I can start marking these with, I think this is a 3, and I think this is a 4. And I can add additional flags and ratings to my images, as well as labels. I can also sort by star rating. So for instance, I want to look at anything that's 3 stars or better. Now I can see all of my images that are rated by 3 stars or better. Now you'll notice that they're organized by capture time still, but I don't have to do that. If I wanted to, I could say, you know what? I want the best ones to be on top. So instead of sorting by capture time, I want to sort by rating. And now it's 3 through 5. It's in a descending order, but I can flip that at the bottom. I'm sorry, it's an ascending order, so I can switch it to descending, and now all of my 5s are on top. So it's very easy to not only rate and flag your images, but to also organize your images and then only see the ones you want to work on. And there's lots of different ways you can filter these. I could filter them by color, so these are just the night shots. I could filter them by if they're unrated. I want to see all the ones I've missed rating. So these have no star rating at all. So maybe I need to do picks or flags here. So it's nice. I do have a lot of choices here, as well as I can look at all the ones I rejected. I guess I didn't reject any. Let's go back and go to all and just reject a couple, just so you can see what happens. So I go through and maybe I'm rejecting this one and this one and this one because it's too light and that one. So if I look at all of my rejected images, I can see them very quickly and I go, you know what? I think I was overzealous on this one. I think I can do something fun with that big heart. So instead of rejecting it, I am going to favorite it, or it's going to be a pick. So I'll hit the P key. Immediately it exits the rejected filter. And if I switch over to favorites, there it is in favorites. So let me go back to all photos so we can see a little more of what we're working with. But that's one of the great things is I can do this really, really quick. And I can see very easily how I've rated something, if I've rated something, and control things. So that's rating and flagging and color labeling. Let's talk about a couple of other ways that I can organize. And I'm going to go and I'm going to jump into, say, the Paris images. And I want to organize these a little different. I want to organize them maybe by people, or maybe I want to organize them by people and by scenics and day and night shots. So what I want to do is I actually want to put them into albums. I want to organize them, but I don't want to change the folder structure of my images on my hard drive. So if you think about it, anything under folders will affect where things are located, where things are named on your hard drives or on your cloud drives. But if you just want to organize them internally, think of your music library. You might want to put together all your 80s music, or for some of you who weren't born in the 80s, you might want to put in all your music from the 10s, and I'm talking 2010, not 1910, though it would be really cool if there was somebody over 100 listening to this webinar. So I might want to organize things virtually, like my music, but I don't want to move them around. And that's where albums come into play. So I can go ahead and I can select, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key on a Windows machine. I'm going to hold down the Command key on a Mac. And this allows me to select multiple images. So I'm selecting just some with people. I'm going to miss a few intentionally. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create an album. I click on that. Every picture that was selected is put into that album, and I'm going to call that album People. And the really nice thing about this is albums don't have to be just about one folder. It can be of like my Paris images. I could, in this album, put in miscellaneous photos of people that I might have in another album. So I'm going to go ahead. I can click on this image. And here I just want to be quick. I can drag it and drop it right onto the People album. You'll notice it hasn't moved from my miscellaneous photos. And maybe I want to put in one of the dive shots here. So we'll go ahead, put that into People. And so if I jump over to the People album, I have these images. And this is a virtual organization, but they haven't been moved out of my other folders. And that's the great thing about albums is I can do virtual sorting, and it's another quick way for me to organize things. If I went back to Paris, and instead of sorting it by rating, I'm going to sort it by capture time. As you can see, my people shots generally were shot at about the same time. So I can select those, and I think I have some other ones down here. And I can grab these, and you'll notice I've actually am clicking on some that I've already brought in. And I have multiple shots, but if I go ahead and bring that in, and I'm going to just do this by dragging it right onto the People album, okay? Even though I've dragged things in once, it doesn't make a second copy. It's smart enough to know, yeah, you've already brought that image into People. But this way I can very quickly control exactly what I want and organize things in yet another way in Luminar with libraries. So that's the difference between a folder and albums. And as you can see, the top, these shortcuts are also building. I can look at my favorites from all of my albums. I can also look at maybe something I recently edited. This was the first image that I dragged in, and I had done work on it. So I can see things that I've edited without having to try to remember, oh yeah, what have I worked on? And that's really a very nice feature. So as you can see, the way we've designed the library and the way you interact with the library is very, very natural. It's very, very fluid. Let's go back to all of my photos and talk about one other feature. So these are all the photos that I've brought in. I have the beach photos in Paris and whatnot, but there might be a situation where I want to just work on a couple of images and I don't want to actually bring them into my library. Somebody might have given me a couple of images and they want me to process them, and I just want to get them in, process them, and export them. Well, I have a third option at how I can work with my images, and that's something called QuickEdit. So if I go over here and I say Open Images for QuickEdit, and I want to go in and I'm going to just do a quick edit on this tiger and this other one I have, maybe a couple of these beach shots. Okay, and I'm going to click open. Now, what's different here? Okay, well, first of all, you can see it immediately brought this into my edit part of the interface or the edit view. I'm going to hold off on editing for just a moment because I want to jump back into my library, because I want to point out that in the library, there is now a quick edit location. Okay, these are my quick edits, and I still have my first picture. If I want to see all of my pictures, and this is important, this is how you navigate through the libraries, is I can go up one level at a time with this little arrow. If I click on the drop down next to it, it allows me to very quickly jump to specific folders in my folder structure. So I can just go to my quick edits right there. And when I switch to either of these, when I jump to my quick edits, there are the three images that I brought in and that I want to process. So let's say I want to process these. Now, the nice thing is they don't exist in my folders. I haven't moved everything, and I didn't need to make an album. I just want to do a quick edit on these and export them. So we'll look a little bit about how you could process an image. And this procedure is the same whether you're pulling images from your full photo library, from an individual folder, or from an album. So I'm going to go in and grab this mediocre shot right here. It's a beach shot. It has potential. So if I want to edit this, I can easily get to it a couple of ways. I can double click it if I want, which is probably what I would normally do, and that would load it into the edit window, or I could select it and click edit in the upper right hand corner. Really, whatever works best for you. The nice thing is there's usually 2 or 3 ways to do everything, and you can just use the workflow that's natural, whether it's a mouse or a drop down window or even a right click. So I'm going to double click on this, and this immediately will load the picture. And I see there's potential for it. And as a matter of fact, when I loaded that in, you can see that my Luminar looks are available to me. Now, looks are great. For those of you who haven't used Luminar at all, I know there were some new folks here, looks allow you to do 2 things very quickly: either repair an image or enhance or stylize an image. And we have a variety of looks that are available. So if I go here, and I was working in the street photography earlier today, but I'm going to click next to the words Luminar looks and click on the word street. And what happens is I can now see all of the Luminar looks collections that are available to me. Now, the first 7 of these come bundled when you download Luminar and install it. However, the rest of these I got because if you go to our website, and again, Laurie will show you that at the end of the webinar, you can download additional Luminar look collections and easily add them to the software. As a matter of fact, there's a little button down here, if I go scroll down a little bit, and says get more Luminar looks. I'm going to scroll back up to the top and click on Essentials. And I want you to notice that across the bottom, all of those thumbnails will change. The words below them actually have changed. And I'm going to read them for you, for those of you who might be watching on a smaller device. Uh, and for instance, the first one is AI Image Enhancer, Artificial Intelligence Image Enhancer. Second one is Classic Black and White. As we go through, Contrast Enhancer. So these are nice basic fixes you may just want to do to an image. And instead of having to go through and add individual filters, I can quickly say, you know what? Let's just see what happens if I click on the image enhancer. And immediately, when I apply that, a variety of filters have been applied to this image. Let me switch over to the edit view, because you don't necessarily, and this is great, you don't necessarily have to be in the edit view if you just want to go through and quickly process a bunch of images. But if I click over to the edit view, I want you to notice that on the right side, these are the 4 filters that AI Image Enhancer added to my photo. And there were already some settings that were adjusted. And as I click through, and I'm going to click through just to kind of show you how it updates, if I click on, say, Classic Black and White, of course, the processing of the image changes. And on the right side, I actually see the filters, or filter in this case, that was used. So for instance, if I go over and I choose Sky Enhancer, and that's towards the right side on the bottom, it will automatically add a little bit of develop and the AI Sky Enhancer, soft and airy, and so forth. Now this is the nice thing about these Luminar looks. If I pick a look and I kind of like it, I'm going to go to Contrast Enhancer, but I think it's a little bit too much. Every single Luminar look can be adjusted and blended back with the original image. So I can just move this amount slider to the left and I can blend it together. Now, it's not really valuable in these. These are pretty subtle adjustments. But if I switch over to say something such as my dramatic looks, and I click on one of these, I might get definitely a more enhanced image. So this one just is really popping the colors. I like that where it's going, but I could scale that back with my amount slider. But this is something else that's really nice. And I'm going to jump over to the dramatic look here. It adds a few more filters. Not only can I scale it back here in my amount slider, but all of the filters that have been applied are live. So I can go through and I can say, I really like what it's done, but, I do want to have a little bit more color in this image. And obviously the color was pulled back a little bit. You'll notice under dramatic, there is saturations -63. So I can move that to the right. So the nice thing is about all of the Luminar looks is that you can apply them and get somewhere where maybe you're done and export it, or you can use it as a starting point and then you can adjust how well it blends with the original image and also modify individual parameters. Now this is all non-destructive. As a matter of fact, if I go ahead and I switch to Remarkable and dial that back, and the other thing I can do is I can add additional filters. I'm going to just click Add Filter and just add maybe a little bit of style to this. Maybe I want to add a golden hour to give it some sunset feel. And so not only can I use what's there and modify it, I can add additional filters to create a look that I want. So that's one way to process an image. And if I like this, I can actually go back to my library. I'm clicking to the library. I'm going to step up to my quick edits, and I could actually copy and paste or sync any of my edits to other photos. And this is a great feature. So granted, I think the starting point was a little bit different here, so it may not be the best example, but if I wanted to, I could hold down the Alt or the Command key, select just this second image, and once it's selected, if I right click on it, I can go to my adjustments and say, sync all of my adjustments. In other words, copy everything I used on the first image to any other images in my library. So there they are, I've done that. It's stylized. And this is great if you have a folder of images or just even a group of images. Maybe I would have my people images and I could process one of these and then I could simply sync all of those adjustments to the other images so that they all have the same style. Let me jump back to the edit mode. And as a matter of fact, while we're in the edit mode, I want to just show you a couple of other things. Now, I realize I'm going very fast. There's a lot in our libraries feature that's coming out. So I just want to kind of touch on it, but we will and we do have videos coming out as well as articles that will walk you through the individual aspects of this. So if I wanted to edit this, I could step up into the upper folders, but there's something else I can do when I'm in the edit mode. And that's if you go to the very top, right next to this orange button, which is actually showing me my looks. And if I click here, I could say, you know what? Show me a film strip. So now I'm in the edit mode and I can very quickly jump between any of my images to work with. So I don't have to go back and forth. I could process this one and then go to another one. So let's go ahead and process this image. I like actually working with people. I do a lot of portraits, and I haven't actually ever worked with this shot before. So it'll be interesting to see what I can do with it. So I could use a preset, but the other thing is maybe I just want to start from scratch. And starting from scratch, you normally in the edit mode see it says there's no filters here. It's a clear workspace. And I could go in and click the add filter button and start bringing in individual filters that I want to work with. And we do break them up by group, essential filters that you might need, issue fixers maybe to reduce haze or noise, creative filters. If you've been working with a lot of photo developing applications, we have a lot of the higher end developed filters, as well as just some utility, brightness, and darkness. And I could easily grab any of those, search in a search box, and even just look at, say, my essentials or my creative, so I'm not distracted by the other filters. And that's great. I could bring them in one at a time. But what's really nice is we have something called a workspace, and it comes bundled with a handful of workspaces there, and you can actually create your own. But this is how a workspace functions. I'm going to click on Quick and Awesome. And what Luminar will do is it will bring in a series of filters that are great to make my image awesome and do it very quickly. I could go in and say, oh, I'm working on portraits, so I want a lot more filters to work with. And then it could bring in a bunch of filters that I might use to develop a portrait. So I don't have to bring them in one by one. It doesn't mean I can't add filters or even remove filters, but it's a great starting point. So I really enjoy working with Quick and Awesome. It brings in 4 basic filters, and it takes advantage of our artificial intelligence filters. And we have a couple of these, and we also have some image-aware filters. Now, a lot of times when you're processing an image, you might bring in a develop filter, work with shadows and highlights and contrast and color. Well, what we've done is we've analyzed hundreds of thousands of images before and after ones that were submitted to us by a lot of photographers. And we saw how they enhanced an image. And we used machine learning to be able to apply this to an image that you would bring in. So when I move the boost slider, not only is it going to balance out the tone, but it may also work on some of the colors, some of the clarity and sharpness. But instead of having to move a lot of sliders, I can move a single slider, and a lot of those decisions were figured out under the hood. So I'm going to just move this to the right. And as you can see, it's actually opening up a lot of the detail on the jacket. It's brightening things up a little bit, but not blowing out the sky. And then I'm ready to work on the sky. And the sky enhancer filter is great because I know I want to work on the sky. And this is smart enough to be able to figure out the difference between sky and blue jeans and water. And as I said, I haven't worked with this image, so this is great. I love working without a net because everything is always prefabbed in our world. So if it works, it's great. And if it doesn't work, well, we'll see. So I'm going to move the AI Sky Enhancer And you'll notice as I move it to the right, it really starts only affecting the sky. It doesn't affect his blue jeans, doesn't affect the water, and it's starting to bring out the blue as well as the sunset. So if we take a look at this image, that the AI sky enhancer automatically kind of masks out the sky, brings in clarity to the clouds, and it will work on skies from blue hour to blue hour, which is right before sunrise to right after sunset. So whether you have an orange sunset or a nice blue sky in the middle of the day, the AI Sky Enhancer can easily fix that. Now, next to each of our filters, there is a couple of buttons. One of the key buttons that I'm looking at is this little eyeball, and that allows me just to toggle on and off that filter. And as you see, that's exactly what the Sky Enhancer is doing. If I look at the Accent AI, I could also toggle that off and you can see what it does. So this is nice just to see what's happening. I'm going to bring down my saturation. I hate saturation because if you move it up, it just super saturates everything, and saturated colors just get more saturated, muted colors get better. So saturation is kind of like trying to find painting with a broom. Now, here's a trick. I love vibrance. Vibrance takes the muted colors and enhances them, but doesn't saturate colors that already have good saturation values. So a lot of times I'll bring the saturation down a little bit and the vibrance up, and that kind of evens out my colors a little bit. Okay, it makes them pop nicely, and I'll add a little bit of clarity. And just as I indicated before, I might want to add an additional filter. I'm going to add a vignette. So I'll click on the vignette filter, and a little goes a long way. If somebody says, I love your vignette, it's too strong. Vignettes should be subtle. And so I'm going to go ahead, just bring it down a little bit, bring the size down. And the last thing I want to do with this image is I want to do a little cropping because I find this is distracting. So I can very easily go to my Tools menu, hit Crop. It will at first lock my aspect ratio. So if I move this, it's trying to maintain the aspect ratio of the original shot. But I can very easily unlock that with this button up here to the left, or even choose an aspect ratio that I may need to deliver something. So maybe I know I want to do an 8:10, and that's actually a 10:8, so we'll go down here. And now I can crop this so it's perfectly framed for an 8:10, and I can actually see my rule of thirds, and I'll simply click Done. So I've processed this image, and the nice thing is I'm ready to go. I'm ready to export this. So if I wanted to, I've processed this image. I can do this right from the Edit menu. I could, if I needed to, jump back to the library. And if I jump back to the library, let me go up a level. There's the image I processed. So I can send out one image, or I can send out a group of images. I just want to process this one, so I select it. As a matter of fact, just because I can, I'm going to select these two, right-click. I'll go to Adjustments, Sync Adjustments. There we go. It's processing them. It'll take a second, so let's let it do its thing. There we go. And look at that. It's processed all of my images with the same developing, and this is great. If I wanted to tweak the individual ones, I could. But I'm going to just export this one image. I'll have that selected. I'll go File. I'll go Export. And when I export this, we'll export this to my desktop. I can go ahead and give it a name. Okay. And this is a good friend of mine, a very talented video director, Maxim. So I'm going to export this, and when I export it, I can choose if I want it to be a JPEG, perhaps that I'm going to post to social media, or perhaps a TIFF file because it's going to get printed in a brochure. I can export all of these flavors, and depending on the format I select, I'll have additional options such as in TIFF, what the depth of my color space is, if I want to compress it, and even changing the color space as well as the size. And then I can simply hit Save. So with that, I'm already out of my photos. Now I'm going to hit Cancel for now because I do want to just add one last thing to QuickEdits. So we have these images, and ironically, I really wanted to fix this tiger image. So I might bring that in, and again, I'd go into Edit. I'd go Add Filter. I don't need to add a filter. I'm going to Quick and Awesome. This is just because I think these are beautiful animals. I want to point something out here. The Quick and Awesome has the AI Sky Enhancer filter as part of the workspace. but it's smart enough to know there is no sky in this image, so it's grayed out. And that's the beautiful thing. If you've created a preset or using a preset that has the sky enhancer on an image without sky, it just won't apply the sky enhancer. It's smart enough to do that. So we'll bring up a little bit of the vibrance, some clarity, and just because I want to see the detail in the fur, I'm going to add a little bit of sharpening to the image. And there we go. And it's nice and sharp. And even from here, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and go File and export this image. So now I'm done working with these 3 images. I'm going to jump back into my QuickEdit library. We'll go up here a level to my QuickEdits. And I'm done. But I don't want to see these again because these were images that a friend asked me to process. So I can simply select these images, right-click, and all I do is I go Remove from QuickEdits. So now they're no longer accessible. I've just basically said, don't look at them anymore. I'm done. And it's a great way of working. Let me jump back to all of my photos. And as you can see, I can continue working. That was pretty fast and furious, but it should give you an idea of what the future holds with the new version, Luminar 3, Luminar with libraries, and how incredibly easy it is to use, and yet how truly powerful it is. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Laurie to show you where you can get some more information about Luminar with libraries.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I'm going to go to the home page so you folks can see this. If you go to skylum.com, under Luminar, we have different sections. So I want to point out a few things, particularly for you, those of you who are asking about using third-party plugins and things like that. So under Luminar, if you go over to the right, see where it says Learn More. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few spots, and plus I want to show you a roadmap for future features that we're going to be included into Luminar. But if you go to education, this is our blog section, and you're going to see next week we'll have a bunch of new videos with some articles that will be included in here. This, by the way, is a really great complete walkthrough of Luminar with libraries that Abba did last week. He showed some different images, so if you guys want to take a look at that, that'll be a really nice resource for you. The other things too is we're going to be updating the user guide with Luminar 3. The video gallery, we are putting together some brand new videos that will be going on here. Everything from how to install your Luminar 3 to using it with, let's say, Lightroom, for instance. So you'll find all that information, again, under Luminar Video Gallery. So you want to check that out as well. So as far as webinars too, we do have a webinar section under Explore. And so for any past events, you can go through here and just rerun through any of these videos that we have. This particular one is being recorded. We'll probably get it up in a few days or so, sometime next week, and you'll be able to view it here. But be sure to check at the bottom of the screen where it says past events. We do have another one coming up. Let's see, at the end of the month here, organizing and editing your travel images. So we'll continue to add new webinars, lots of new information for you. Now, here's a big question. I think a majority of you folks were asking about, what features are coming up, and that's why I wanted to jump over here. This is the Skylum.com Luminar roadmap. In fact, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy it right now. I'm going to put it in our chat, and I'm going to share it with everybody so you have this. We'll go ahead and just send it to everybody. So in the chat, there's a link to Skylum Luminar roadmap. Now, think of this as a kind of building blocks. Right now, we have a really good foundation, but we're going to be adding new features all through 2019. And the really nice thing for those of you who have in our 2018, you're going to get free updates throughout the year. So you'll see here that there's what's happening now, what's coming up. Just next week, we're going to see libraries. Abba showed you sync adjustments, an info palette panel, and some new looks are happening as well. Planned. Here's some new plans that are coming out throughout the year, and I'm sure there's going to be quite a few more than just what's listed here, but these are some of the main questions. Migration tool for Lightroom, for instance, or smart searching for Luminar library. So this is a beginning for us, but we'll continue to grow and add to this list. So I look forward to features coming out. Okay, I think that does it for us. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Again, we'll get you some new resources that you can get some more answers to. And please join us for any future webinars. I'll go ahead and let you say bye to everyone.
Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I know it was fast and furious, but I am truly excited about this release. And I did want to point out that a lot of the editing functions are the same. So even our historical webinars where we don't necessarily talk about libraries, all of the editing techniques, working with the different filters, working with adjustment layers and masking, all of those are still valuable because they work exactly the same way in Luminar 3 as they did in previous versions. And with that, I'd like to once again thank you and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.